We're in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melting into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, she, her, and hers, and I'm the Senior Partnerships Manager here at AllVoices. Today, I'm very excited to welcome our next guest onto the interview series, Christina Disler. She is the consultant and founder of Werklab. Christina, thank you so much for being here. If you want to share a little about yourself, including your pronouns, and when you were younger, do you remember how exactly you answered the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Of course. Thank you so much. So, as the other Christina said, my name's Christina Disler. I go by she, her, and hers. I am the founder of Werklab, a holistic wellness co-working space in Vancouver, Canada. And I am a consultant who works with leaders over in London. I have made the move over here. Really still around integrating well-being at work and focusing on them and their vision and aligning company culture to it. I would say, as a young one, I really wanted to make the world a better place. I grew up prior to having my own business. I was managing an HR department. I definitely didn't grow up wanting to do that. I don't think I knew what HR was as a child. But I wanted to work for the UN, and whether that was as a lawyer or, I was really involved in the Red Cross when I was young. I just wanted the world to be a bit of a better place and be part of it. So it wasn't like a specific role that I had my eyes and heart set on. But it was really around the theme of, the world just being better.
I love that. I think holistic well-being is really important as well. And it's exciting to see a lot of companies and especially leaders prioritize that with their teams too. Fast forward to today, I know you shared a little bit about your journey to this work, but how do you think your personal experiences have really led you up until this point to be the founder of Werklab?
Well, actually, I have a story that's probably quite aligned to AllVoices that has influenced my journey. So before the story, just a bit of background, as I struggled with mental health growing up, with anxiety, depression, and an eating disorder. And I kind of cycled through almost like an identity around mental health in my adolescence. And so I ended up dropping out of my schooling out of my undergrad. Which was really challenging. I think my generation, I'm in my early 30s, I'm 32. So we were kind of, I feel like the cusp end of, the old way of thinking, like you got to go and do your undergrad. And if you don't do your undergrad, it'll be a real struggle for you to get a job, which I'm keen and happy to see that is shifting and alternative ways of education are really rising up. But that was a really big kind of moment around not feeling like I fit in, that I didn't fit into the academic school system or how things were like how we were taught. I was diagnosed with ADHD, and I just don't think I learned the way that this school system taught. And so feeling like I didn't really fit in, and also because I didn't finish my undergrad, I felt like I had to work really hard to have a job and to be employed. And during my years, ironically running HR, I actually was sexually harassed for 4 out of the 6 years in that role. And that was a really painful experience because, of course, provided the role I was in, I was just taught or told that I needed to grow thicker skin, and that as a woman in business with a career ahead of herself, she needed to kind of get used to being hit on, or, that there was like some innocence to it. And I ended up actually, through that experience, I ended up sacrificing, obviously, a level of personal safety. Every time that I walked in the doors at work, I really felt like I couldn't actually be my authentic self because I was ready to be kind of not energetically attacked, but not feeling like I could be really in a state of vulnerability, which is part of being human. And without being able to access vulnerability in the workplace, you know, it impacted my ability to actually give my best work to my employer. I couldn't, it impacts your way to innovate, to connect, try new things. If you're always on guard that someone's gonna, walk into the room, you have this guard up and you actually, in some ways, almost like disassociate from your true self. And so when I started Werklab, I was really passionate about creating a work environment. And ironically, it's a co-work space. So I'm not employing these people, but a work environment where you could walk in the door and actually disarm, that you could take your armor off. And how would that work for everyone in their, professional pursuits, if they could be in an environment where if they needed to cry, they weren't fearful of their emotions, that they could go into what we call the Zen Den, a really, kind of intimate space within our workplace. And it wouldn't be abnormal to see that. And how, I hate to say that it's revolutionary, but really, like, what would that do for our level of work if we were really connected to ourselves? And so this really painful chapter and experience definitely influenced the work that I did. I don't think that I really connected the dots to it all until, maybe a few years after launching it, like, oh, this is why, because I didn't feel that sense of safety in my work environment for so many years, that this actually influenced why I wanted it to feel like home. That it wasn't that every day, when you walk in the doors at work, you're armoring up and kind of leaving your true self at the door or leaving that person at home. But what would it be like to feel really connected to yourself and to your intuition and not having to abandon yourself at work? That was a really long-winded response, but it is something I'm really passionate about, Christina.
Well, I can definitely tell that this is something that you're passionate about. Number one, no one should have to experience that full stop. And number two, thank you for being vulnerable and sharing your story with me and our listeners. I think that's so important. Psychological and physical safety at work should be table stakes. And it's really important to really provide that environment as employers, as leaders, as people, for folks as well. And that's all wrapped up into kind of how we show up at work and just the culture we want to actively create for one another. In your opinion, what are some actionable ways that we can really democratize that company culture to empower employees, no matter what role they hold in the organization, as well?
I think it's not like an easy one-stop shop, right? Like, it's not like I can be like, here's the playbook. I definitely would say, first and foremost, it has to be top down. You cannot, the way that organizational systems and structured organizational systems and structures are currently composed, or how they are structured, is very hierarchical still. It's great. I love seeing flatter organizations, but we haven't really made that the kind of norm. And so just by proxy of how it works, you have to have this stuff top down. And I was going to say, it's also a lot different if you're starting a new business and you're starting a business and planning to grow it versus a business that has a history of a culture. And it's kind of how we see, like, how Tesla can enter the market and put themselves in a certain position is very different than, say, a GM completely changing how they position their brand, right? Like, there's just, it takes time. I would say, in order to support that democratization, like to AllVoices, like, it is so important to have listening programs in place. The challenge is actually to get that transparency. And I think, if you have that history of an organization that is quite fear-based, which a lot of businesses are, it's quite revolutionary to see businesses that have, you know, not got out, but like set themselves up in a really transparent place or transparent way. It takes time to transform from the inside out, but that transparency is absolutely key. So I'm not here, I swear to God, I'm not on the podcast just to plug AllVoices, but I do love so many elements of the product and of the application, around the anonymity. And like I said, by nature, there's a lot of elements of capitalism that are based in fear. And that's how a lot of these systems and structures have worked for so long. And I love that that's changing and power is coming to employees. I think with the rise of remote work and hybrid work, you have to build organizations built with a culture of trust. But trust isn't something that happens overnight. But what supports trust and how trust is earned is fundamentally in transparency. But it can be really scary to an organization who hasn't, you know, gotten it started with that mandate, like we're going to build a culture around transparency. It is challenging to, take old school leaders or old school managers that it's like such a foreign concept that you might have something as simple as open book policy around your financials. Something like that might feel terrifying to someone who's run a business or been a manager in a business for however many decades or years. And that's just like, absolutely not. So, like I said, I didn't really give you a straight answer. But I really do believe that a huge part around this democratization is building a company culture of trust. And trust is not something that comes overnight, but transparency is a fundamental component to actually earning that trust. Because we're now living in a day and age where employees, it is going to be the norm. It's going to be the real undeniable that employees do have a lot more power than they have ever had before.
Absolutely.
And rightfully so.
Yeah, right.
And plug it, and rightfully so, because we're all human. We're all one of the same.
Yeah, I definitely agree that employees have a lot of power, and having those listening programs is really important because whether you have them or not, people are talking to one another, they're talking to their friends, family about their experiences at work as well. And you're right, there is no playbook to create a best in class company culture and democratize that, empower employees, but there are ways that you can really operationalize and implement programs to create that trust. Just like any other relationship, it has to be intentional, and you can't forget about that as well. I know you mentioned kind of remote work, and we're seeing a lot of employees really asking for that, and asking for that trust that they can get their work done as adults at their organization, with the caveat that you can't just, for a larger organization or wherever you are, that context is important. Do you think that eventually every organization, whether they are federal, private, public, should implement some form of remote work?
Absolutely. I mean, I need to also name there are certain constraints operationally where some jobs just absolutely can't be done remote. So I do honor that. That's a really bold statement to be like, yes, everyone should have, remote or hybrid built in to every employee. Unfortunately, there are some jobs that operationally just cannot be done remote, i.e., waitressing or, I mean, there's so many factory working. And I definitely say that now the norm is when you are interviewing, if you are in HR, be prepared. If you haven't already prepared, be prepared for that question in the interview process. What is your policy on remote work and hybrid working? I think I feel really lucky because my business, Werklab, is a co-working business. And for people who aren't familiar, co-working is a shared office service. That's the most basic way of saying it. But we have, Werklab, we have a studio, we have a practitioner room, we have a meditation area. We have a lot of additional services that come with what we provide. But I've been privy to the world of remote work for 6 years now, that we've been operational for 6 years. So I have seen the shifts and trends happening a lot longer than the pandemic. I think that the reason why I got into the business got into the industry, I mean, for many different reasons, but I knew that this was the way of the future. Seeing the rise of, seeing generational influences, that this is now kind of something that younger ones are, even before the pandemic, were wanting a sense of autonomy in their work. I don't think that that's going away. Having exposure to the world of remote work, I knew that it was a trend happening. Of course, no one could have guessed about the pandemic, how it would exponentially increase how quickly we adopted these practices. But now that people have had the taste of it, I don't think that it is going anywhere. And I think it actually will be a massive disservice to the success of a business if they have a hard line around like no remote work, everyone in the office. I think that is a very archaic way and approach. And I mean, I haven't heard of any business. I've heard of a few based on headlines, but as far as within my network, I haven't heard of any company that said absolutely not. Everyone has to be in their office Monday to Friday. I think that again is tapping into that fear-based mentality. I think for sure there's practices that were developed in response to the pandemic quite quickly with remote work and hybrid working that need reevaluation, i.e., like everything needs to be a 30 or 60-minute Zoom call and things that we just picked up through the pandemic in a quick reactive state. So I think there's opportunity to be quite strategic around how you incorporate or take on a remote or hybrid policy and really set these teams and your employees up for success. But there are many successful businesses that have actually, one company I always read about before the pandemic was Buffer. And I find it's a really interesting business to study, similar to Hootsuite, social media platform, management platform. And they built their entire global business up remote. And, from the get-go, it means they have to be much more intentional around communication and certain systems in place, but they've done an incredible job on it. And they have actually a really great blog you can read about their culture and how they've really created a culture. Because that's going to be the struggle for a lot of businesses. I think often we look back, if I think, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, asking my friend, what's it like to work at ABC company? Oftentimes they would speak about the experience of working for a business based on the office. So you would have comments about, well, we wear jeans to work, we do beer after work on Thursdays. A lot of an employee's experience would be related by the container of the office. So when you remove that, all of a sudden it becomes a lot more dependent. An employee's experience becomes a lot more dependent on the interpersonal experiences they have. So what's it like when I talk to my manager? Do I get frustrated every time? It heightens actually the interpersonal skills and emotional intelligence, I would say, of management, of your colleagues. And this is a bit frightening, I think, for companies if they don't put the proper trainings or tools in place that really support people. And I think a lot of companies are grasping at straws and throwing different programs, or whether that's a Peloton or whatever it might be, like throwing these things, trying to keep employee engagement, and they're really missing a lot of fundamental pieces around human interaction and how do we make people feel. So yeah, I think it's a requirement though. I think it's a requirement that you can't expect to attract large top talent if you can't really stand behind why you're doing what you're doing. And in today's day and age, I just don't buy it that you need to be in the office Monday to Friday during a specific, time frame, a time window.
Yeah, I definitely agree. People are looking for that autonomy. And you mentioned kind of that generational shift and also those interactions with managers and leaders, really setting the tone for those connections too, and how you feel about coming to work with the generational shift that is happening with more Gen Zers joining the workforce. We talked about power dynamics too. And you work with a lot of leaders. What is a kind of must have that people leaders need to incorporate in their strategy to be successful in the future and be really good managers and leaders?
So it sounds really simple. I love how I just said, oh, there's no playbook. There's nothing that's like a one-stop shop. This is how you do it and you'll be fine. And it's not that you'd be fine if you do this, but I would say, kind of echoing my last response, you have to be intentional about culture and purpose, like not having lip service, because I think there's this element again around transparency. These younger generations have grown up with access to information and, they're digital natives. They could Google before we probably could properly write, and to have that access to information makes a different worker. It really does. And so that element of transparency, if you're incongruent, like maybe you don't even have, your mission is loud and clear, but there's nothing to me more damaging than outlining that you stand behind something, or this is what this is who we are, this is why we do what we do, and you actually are so far off. Your behavior is so far off from what you're saying and putting out to the world. That incongruency can be felt through the entire organization. And I think now these younger generations and this power that has finally shown up is actually creating a level of accountability where you cannot do that anymore. I think, again, the lip service, it's there's many different options of people finding out, the reality of what it's like to work for a company based on different sites. Now is your time to actually really, as leaders, connect to, I know this sounds like quite not soft, because I don't want to say it makes soft sound like a bad thing, but it's really around connecting to the heart. Because why you do what you do is about connecting to the heart, is about connecting to that emotional place. And that is why people like younger generations, we're not driven by money. We're not our parents' generations. What matters to us is a lot. There's a deep grounded element about why we choose to work for the companies we choose to work for now, because we know, like, our time is a resource. It is not indefinite. And I think we really have a deeper understanding of, like, life is too short. And what are we going to do with this life? So we want to contribute our time into something that we feel connected to. So I would say, hands down, being intentional about why does this organization exist? Not the product. The product helps. The product is, how does this manifest into what we do? But it's about the North Star vision of, like, why do we get up every day? It's not about building the thing that you're building. It's about why you're doing it.
Absolutely. Understanding those motivators of why we show up for work, why are we working at that individual organization as well for the team is really important to understand and have those conversations with your team as well. And as leaders, you have that additional responsibility too, to make sure you're keeping a pulse on what's happening and, talking about that kind of career development and that the big why as well. It sounds like, having a really important kind of intentional listening program, really thinking about company culture from a top-down approach, modeling behavior, having empathy, and really being intentional, again, is really important. Are there any other common mistakes you see companies making in their people strategy today that are either cautionary tales or, anything you're reading out there in the universe?
Well, I have this, it was actually a lesson I learned through having my own business that now I kind of take it with me with the people I work with. And it's actually about strategy in general. And I'm really kind of passionate about the themes of yin or feminine energy at work versus the hyper masculine that we've had for so many generations before us. But I think even as we approach strategy, I think we can all sit in a boardroom and have this, hammer this out and have this really what we think is considered strategy that's looking, 6, 12, 24 months down the line, maybe even 5 years if it's a bigger vision strategy. But one of my greatest learnings as a business owner was don't be so focused on what's ahead. Of course, we need to, again, have that vision of where we're going. But again, that's the hyper masculine is super planned, the strategy and the analysis and focusing on that. And actually it's about finding the balance of also tapping into the presence. So even as we're implementing and even as we are, having these measures that are important, absolutely, humans are also dynamic beings, and we can't be so focused on where we're going that we also are ignoring where we're at. So that's kind of like applying mindfulness in some ways to business, which I think is very needed. Because also we could have had all the strategies in the world in February or January of 2020. And the most resilient businesses were the ones who are able to be adaptive, that didn't like white knuckle and grip onto the strategy, but said, okay, where are we at right now? What's happening right now? And being responsive to it. So it's about holding both in tandem, and it's not mutually exclusive. It's not like, okay, we don't have any strategy, or it's, okay, we're so focused on the strategy. But especially as we're dealing with people, it's incredibly important to hold both. The other thing is, I would just say, humans are dynamic. And I think we often will come up with something that is just, and I see this very often in HR, like our historic approach to HR can be quite linear. It can be quite, I just feel like it's like boxing. And actually, as humans, there's a lot of beauty in having a dynamic approach and seeing that we are, yes, all individual. And so we can't have like a different strategy for every person. And yet, we're unique beings, but we do have commonality between us. Oh my goodness. Sorry. I'm having so many background noises happen.
No, that's totally fine. I definitely agree with you that people need to be adaptable, being versatile. Humans are dynamic, and especially when you're working with people, having that level of understanding too, remaining present and keeping a balance of having a plan for the future is important. Christina, as we are nearing the end of our time together, is there anything that I didn't ask that you want to share with folks who are listening, or underscoring 1 to 2 key takeaways you hope people bring with them?
I think like my great passion, and I really do hope that in due time this becomes a common knowledge or understanding, is that companies are always focused on ROI, but I truly believe that the more companies can empower people and bringing them back home to themselves, connecting them to their intuition, really empowering their staff, is going to always deliver the best ROI. Healthy and well people, to me, create healthy and well optimized businesses. As companies, they are really made up of people. So I don't think we can ignore the well-being of our people, or think about it as, people are replaceable and just take that approach. I do believe that now more than ever, we do need to show care, and that can look like a lot of different things. But to me, taking care should be on everyone's either manifesto or, mission or values. I think this is an imperative to any business that has success in the future.
Yes, consistently showing up and providing examples of how you are caring for your employees is really important. Healthy people create healthy organizations. Christina, thank you so much for being on Reimagining Company Culture this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Christina.
Of course, and as a reminder for folks who are listening, at AllVoices, we really believe in that employee feedback management as a requirement for the organization to succeed overall. Have a good rest of your day, everyone.